Well, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Hello, family. I'm so glad that you are joining us today. I am Boomy Anderson, and I am the host of Intersection. Today, as you already know, June is Black Music Month. And so today I want to do an episode that connects music with Black men. And I'm joined by, I'm going to call him the incomparable. Kevin Powell, who I consider to be a great friend of mine, and I want to. I know many of you are already familiar with him, and let me just give you a little bit about him. He is, of course, a Grammy-nominated poet. I believe that he's also working on a new project as it relates to spoken word. He's a human rights activist. He's authored 16 books, including my personal favorite, The Education of Kevin Powell. He's also a filmmaker, so he has a film out now. He'll be doing an HBCU tour with this film. It's called "When We Free the World," and it is, I believe, it's about Black men specifically. I've seen some clips of it. So, but it's about manhood, and so we want to welcome him. He's also a journalist. I can remember back in the '90s reading his articles in Vibe magazine. Of course, you know Vibe was started by Quincy Jones, and so I am so honored to have him with me today. This is like a huge thing for me. Thank you so much, Kevin, for being on this podcast. And today we're
Thank
going to
you.
be actually intersecting uh black men in music, okay, for Black Music Month. So thank you again for being with us today.
Oh, it's my honor. I was looking forward to this, and I've had a lot of great folks like yourself ask me to do their podcast, and you're the first one I'm doing because you're my homie. You know what I'm saying? We go back, and I mean, so many connections, and thank you, thank your family for who they are. Continued blessings to the spirit of your twin. We've worked
Yes.
together around the poetry, everything, and I am so sorry. Should we just ignore the phone ringing
Somebody's
in the
calling.
back?
Well, you're a very important man, so you're very busy, so I
No,
expect the
that's
phone to
right.
be ringing.
I meant to let me turn that off right quick. Hold on a second.
Okay.
This in the show too. All right, I am back. But I'm excited because I just, it's not often I get to talk about music. Man, like I used to. So
Wow.
many heavy things happening in the country. Um, yeah, I have a lot to say, so I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, well, one of the things I do want to ask you about, and we'll start here, is how has music helped you um, personally to express your emotions that sometimes that words, even writing alone, can't do?
Well, that's such a great question to start. I mean, first I have to give props to my mom. My mother, as you know, my whole family's from South Carolina. So even though I'm a northerner, a Yankee, as some of us call the folks up north, in my household, it was the South, South Carolina, Geechee, Gullah, Low Country, Black folks. And so you already know that I was introduced to gospel music, to spirituals, to this classic music. I grew up going to the Pentecostal church tradition, and that was just every Sunday was like a musical. It was like a musical theater up in that piece, as you know. The way we worship as Black people, it's musical. The way we speak
Yes.
is musical in itself. And then my mother also is a product of the civil rights generation. So of course, there was Motown and Stax Records. So I was introduced to Smokey Robinson. I was introduced to Otis Redding, to Rufus Thomas. There was things that stuck with her. Mary Wells. There's certain artists that stuck with her. Sam Cooke, Sam Cooke became one of my favorite artists because my mother, she would always talk, and James Brown, obviously. There was just certain Aretha, and as an only child, and we grew up very poor, and music was really what my therapy. It was my healing at an early age. I had no idea. I had no aspirations of being a music writer when I was an adult, anything of the sort. But I was definitely that kid who took my mother's music in, And then think about it, you go back to the 70s as a kid, I mean, blaxploitation movies, all of them had so many of them had
Yes.
amazing soundtracks. You know what I'm saying? I still remember fondly the Cooley High soundtrack because I think Cooley High turned 40 years old this year. It came out in
Yes.
75.
Yes.
That was part of my education, being a child who was really, and then I went to schools, being a product of post-integration America, loosely defined. Some of us got to go to these schools that were black kids and other kids, and so I was exposed to, man, Led Zepp, and Queen and metal music. I was exposed to, we had teachers that would, I didn't realize at the time, and I met Stevie Wonder very in the last 6 months of my life, which has been one of the thrills of my life.
Wow.
And man, I realized how young I was when Songs in the Key of Life came out, and we would sing his songs in my class as part of our studying of the arts. And so it helped me through depression as a child. We didn't define it as that back then. Sadness, loneliness. I would collect 45 records once I started working because I had to work early since we didn't have any money. So I would go to the store and get my little 45 records. Remember, this is now overlapping with the disco era.
Yes.
I was ride or die for man Chic. I was ride or die for Donna Summer. I was ride or die for the Bee Gees. And so music, even though I can't sing, I can't rap, I can't play an instrument. I never learned how to read music any sort, but I've always had an ear for music. And then there was Soul Train and American Bandstand. You know what I mean? So like
Yes.
that all was part of my education. And then the way it has worked in America, a lot of times, whatever decade we're in, we're looking at the decade 20 years before. So in the 70s, is some people might recall, some of your viewers might recall, there was a lot of emphasis on 1950s. Obviously, American Graffiti came out
Mm.
in the 70s, and
Yes.
Grease. And in New York, we had a local radio station, WCBS, that played all the doo-wop stuff. So I was introduced to, Little Anthony Imperials and, Dion and the Belmonts. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was learning how to be a musicologist, like someone who would dig. And then this thing, hip hop, was bubbling up underneath it all. You know what I mean? And I was there around the first wave of everything happening. And so music, it's interesting you ask me that question. I always say that writing saved my life because I knew I've wanted to be a writer since I was 11. But I now would argue that music also saved my life because once I started going to therapy as an adult, one of the things one of my therapists said to me, she was like, "What were the things that made you happy as a child? Go get those things and keep them close." Well, it was
Mm.
sport, it was sports, it was reading books, and it was music. Those are the things that made me happy as a child. Yeah.
Wow. So why do you think that black men historically um turn to music as an outlet for vulnerability and truth? Why do you think that music attracts that?
Well, Bell Hooks, one of my late mentors, as you know, always said we should name the oppression, racism, or what some people call white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, sexism, patriarchy, sexism. And I think that unfortunately, how we are taught manhood, socialized to be men, it doesn't include us being vulnerable and free and expressing ourselves in the way that women and girls are encouraged to. We're not encouraged to cry. I was called all. I heard all kinds of homophobic slurs, what would be deemed homophobic slurs now, as a boy coming up.
Mhm.
Boys don't do that. Boys can't do this. So even me, I was very. I mean, like you, we're both artists. We're both writers, and so being an artist by its nature is being sensitive and being vulnerable. You know
Yes.
what I mean? But I kept that clocked in. Like people didn't know that I was reading all them books. People didn't know that I was like a romantic kid. When I say I was into music, man, I remember when Smokey Robinson's Cruising came out. I didn't fully understand what love was, but I played that record over and over again because I was like, man, I want to feel like how he's feeling. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Or when the Bee Gees' Too Much Heaven came out, I wanted to feel like that. But because of how we are taught manhood in our society in this world, you're not told that you can express all of that. You know what I mean? And so I kept a lot of it to ourselves. I think music for us is the way to express it. And and it's interesting because in our film, we have a young brother talking about what hip hop means to him in our film "When We Free the World." That it comes through the lips of these other men what I'm feeling, and so that's what it is. But at a certain point, I realized, Kev, you can't just rely on these music artists. You have to redefine or really think about why you're not saying it yourself. You know what I mean?
Mm.
For a long time, writing was that way for me to do it because I was able to just get it out. But I just think that a lot of us are not encouraged. That's what our film is about, really. And it's interesting you asked the question because our film intentionally has an all black male soundtrack. People like Eric Roberson are on there, and
Wow.
you know, and it's we have to fight for being able to express ourselves in totality, and that just hasn't been the case for not just black males, but white males, Latinx males, Asian males, indigenous males. I mean, they could be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheist, agnostic. It doesn't really matter. We're kind of been put in this box, and so many of us seek out like music as a way to express what we're feeling. You know what I'm saying? It's like, but I'm like, that's great, and I'm glad I've had that, but I also realized at a certain point, Kev, you can't just have Babyface talking for you. You can't just have Smokey talking for you. You
Mm,
can't just have, whoever it may be talking for you. You have to be able to express these things yourself, and you gotta be willing to evolve your definition of manhood. And so, what I think about music and my life journey with it, it's like there's been artists like Bob Marley. I'm speaking for black males for a second, Marvin Gaye, Tupac Shakur, Chuck D of Public Enemy, Karis One, Kendrick Lamar now, you know what I'm saying? That Sly Stone, rest in peace, Sly
yes.
Stone, Curtis Mayfield, folks that I felt like I could grab something that would help me to kind of broaden out my definition of manhood. Even if I didn't know anything about their personal lives, or even their personal lives were crazy, I was like, at least I want to be able to. I'll put it to you like this. Bell Hooks said something to me, Sister Boomy, when she was alive. She said when she was coming up, she's a product of the civil rights era as well.
Yes.
She felt like when she listened to black music that black men at least loved black women. That stuck
Ooh,
with me. You know what I mean? Because she
wow.
said, think about, Stone Cold, Stone in Love with You. You know what I mean? I mean, think about the kind of love songs that we were expressing. And
Yes.
she said when we got certain elements of hip hop in the last 10, 15 years, she feels like that, black men actually hate black women. And so music for me has been a way to find myself, to identify myself, to be the rebellious spirit that I am. I'll never forget the first time I heard Chuck D and Flavor Flav on Fight the Power from the Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing film. And when they got to the part about Elvis and John Wayne, I had never heard anyone that bold before. That put a battery in my back. But I also realized, Kevin, you need to be able to express yourself and around, around love and vulnerability. And you need to also pay attention to what Maxwell is saying and what D'Angelo is saying. And, that has to be a part of it. It can't just be, this rage and lashing out and anger and rebelling against the system,
Yes.
but can you express love, and when you're hurting, you know what I mean? And so I think about that, so all of it has had an effect on me. And honestly, now that I'm making music myself with my poetry, it has definitely affected even the kind of poetry that I'm writing and what I want to put out there after this first album that did really well, which was a blessing. But now I'm like, okay, let's dig deeper. Let's dig deeper. Look what Stevie did on songs in the key of life. Man, if people really put that album, I think it's the greatest album ever. Personally, it's
Yes,
one of
I
my
agree.
favorites.
Yes.
But Stevie was expressing every emotion, every emotion. That's what we have to do as men, and the music can be a part of that. It should be a part of that, but we have to be able to take a cue from a Stevie, and I think about it, like Stevie called me, and this is the last thing I say. He called me right at around the time that Kamala lost the election, and his wife reached out to me and on Twitter, on a DM, on X, on a DM. And I thought it was a hoax. I was scared I was being hacked again because I got hacked badly last year.
Yes.
She said, My husband wants to talk to you." Something said, at first I was going to ignore it. I was like, "Who's this?" You know, because she didn't really say her name. Her name was kind of coded. You know what I'm saying? And then she, I said, "Let me respond." My spirit, because you know how we are as black folks, the spirit speaks to us. Can't respond to this person. She said, "My husband wants to talk to you. He read something that you wrote." And I said, "Well, who's your husband?" And then she responded, "Stephen Morris." I said, "Oh my." Because, man, I know everything about Stevie Wonder. Long story short, my wife and I were actually out of the country in the Caribbean, in the West Indies in December. He and I were on the phone for like 3 or 4 hours. And I became the little boy again who had listened to Sir Duke and I Wish. And all I said to him, I said, "I just want to thank you because you're one of the people who saved my life. Your music
Wow.
saved my life. Your music empowered me. Your music freed me. Your music educated me." And I said, "Well, what should I call you?" He said, "Well, how about friend?" And I felt like I was talking to an angel. And I say that to say, long-winded way, Booming, like when you ask me about music and black men, something in Stevie from a very early age, and maybe it's because I don't even know if I should use the term disability because he was blind, but I mean, like,
Yes.
he is so able in all kinds of ways. Fast forward, Stevie and his wife showed up at the LA premiere of our film. He just wanted to sit there and listen to the film. You know what I mean? What does music mean to me as a black man? That I could actually uh, have a conversation with Stevie Wonder and be like, "Man, thank you, just thank you, very personally, for what you've done for so many people, including me." Yeah,
Uh, that had I
like
can
that.
only imagine what I can't even imagine what that experience was like, because Stevie Wonder just transcends so much when you think about, to me he's and to me he's the greatest songwriter.
I yes, yes.
I love Smokey Robinson. I put Smokey Robinson up there as well as just tremendous, songwriter. So I can't imagine what that experience must have been like. But why do you think, that? Why do you think that music
Mm,
impacts us in such a way? Because for me, when my twin passed, because I
mm,
love music. I am a Motown, old school
mhm,
soul person. And I when my sister, because we both she was a jazz head and hip hop head. And I
mm,
like hip hop and I like jazz, but I don't love them, those two
mm,
genres, like she did. But I music at first, it was very difficult for me to listen to music because we had that connection. And so
mm.
I'm a huge Aretha Franklin fan, for example,
Yes,
Gladys Knight. And so those are
yes.
two of my favorites, Luther Vandross. But I could not bring myself to listen to music. It was a few months. I mean, it was several months. But then when I started,
Mm,
the music opened me up to a level of healing, you
yes.
know, that
You
it's
just you
okay to cry. So why do you think music has that effect on the human spirit?
you took the word out of my mouth, healing. I think when you think about the journey of Black people, African people on this planet over the last 450 to 500 years, and what we've had to deal with in America, in the Caribbean, all over the Americas, in Africa, in parts of Europe, where we are in the world, fighting against this oppression, people hating us simply because of who we are as Black people, as African people. Uh, we know the history like I do, being kidnapped, stolen from the motherland, and being stripped of our names, our identities, everything, told that our beautiful selves are ugly, that we have created nothing, when we know that Africa is the cradle of civilization. And it's not just music, it's all kinds of technology and inventions. When you look at civilizations in places like Mali, and we're crammed
Mm,
bottom of these ships, we still had inside of us the music. We had inside of us songs. We had inside of us that beat, that drum beat. You know what I'm talking about.
yes.
And that came with us to Georgia, to the South Carolina where my people are from, to Barbados and Jamaica and Brazil and Colombia and Panama and Honduras. It came with us. And over time, we created spirituals and blues and jazz and rock and roll and soul music. We created reggae and merengue and salsa and bachata and all these different music forms. You know what I mean? It's something that and I think it is healing, because it's like, even as we were working on those plantations, being made to work, our free labor, literally building the economic infrastructure of this
Mm,
country. To this day, we can draw a straight line from then to now. It's like what we had in us was this music that was healing us and liberating us, and the songs also became a way of coded language. I mean, still away to Jesus. We know what that really means. Still away to Jesus. We're trying to run away from this enslavement, this imprisonment that we've been put under. And I think that for us, if I can get personal for a second, I mean, listen, I feel you. I'm trying not to start crying here, Boomy. When you talk about your sister, I think about my grandmother Lottie in South Carolina. I think
wow.
about my aunt Pearlie Mae. I think about my aunt Bertie. I think about relatives, that my mother's sisters, my two aunties, my mother's sisters. It's mm, we get to these services, these funerals. There's a reason why these songs. My cousin Monique, who we just buried a couple years ago, she died in Savannah. We buried her in South Carolina next to her mother. And there's certain songs that just that open us up. You know what I mean? It's like, what do we need it for? I remember the first time I heard Tretch by Naughty by Nature's song, "Everything's Gonna Be All Right," and he has this one line
Mm,
where he said, "I never knew my dad, mother effed her." Now we're not going to use that homophobic slur because I know better now. But the pain that he expressed in never knowing his father was also my pain. You know what I mean?
wow.
Yeah. And so that's why music matters, because what black music specifically has done is given us one safe space to express the totality of all the emotions that we have. When Frankie Beverly died a few months ago, because he represented joy to us.
Yes, yes,
What I mean? He's been passed along across generations of black folks. Like, we know inevitably the lecture slide's gonna start at the family reunion, at the cookout,
right.
because Frankie Beverly's on now, or Cameo's on now. You know what I mean?
Yes,
There are people in our tradition. Aretha, you said Aretha. I know exactly who you're talking about. You don't have to say Aretha Franklin. You don't have to say Aretha Franklin from Detroit. You don't have to say Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. Just one name, because they become family to us.
yes,
You know what I mean? Luther, Aretha. You know what I mean? We know exactly who you're talking about.
yes, yes.
It's our healing. And I have sat here and listened to music that has made me laugh, that has made me cry profusely. I have battled depression most of my life, and it's been black music has saved my life. You know, I can't tell how many times I've put on Miles Davis's "Kind of Blue" album and gone straight to the
Mm,
one track, all blues, and just let that play on repeat, just to kind of. Or I've played John Coltrane's "My Favorite Things," or how often I've listened to Billie Holiday's "God Bless the Child," or listened to Whitney or George's version of "The Greatest Love of All," just because I needed healing in that
mm,
moment. So I turned to music. Yeah.
wow,
Mm,
wow. I you know I want to get to this subject too, because when I read your book, The Education of Kevin Powell, you talked a lot about and I've seen you in also interviews talk of, even with Bell Hooks, talking about toxic masculinity. And so I wanted to definitely touch on, what do you how do you think toxic masculinity shows up in music, and how can
mm.
artists challenge it? How can they, in what ways um, does it show up, and how can artists challenge that toxic masculinity?
On a real basic level, in these present times that we are in, um, stop referring to women and girls as bitchs, hos, all kinds of destructive, derogatory terms. Stop seeing women and girls simply as sexual objects or punching bags.
Yes.
You know, stop hating black women, and how about actually loving black women, and not just your mama, but everyone who is a woman or girl, because they deserve to be treated as the human beings that they are. You know what I mean? Whether you're related to them or not, whether you know them or not. I think about that, and it has to. But when you're an artist, and I've heard it with poets, male poets, I've heard it with male rappers, I've heard it with male singers, and it's not just 20-year-olds. I've heard it from 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70 years old, and older. When you don't even have the ability to listen to black women and girls, and you all's journeys and your challenges and the struggles, and some of your struggles with us, that's problematic to me. And it ain't just the music. It's like, you think about the black males who protested for colored girls, the black males who
Yes.
protested the color purple. You know, I think that for me, I had to go through a process of hitting rock bottom in the early 90s, going to therapy, and admitting, Kevin, you've got some problems here. Some of it is around violence, and some of it is around these warped definitions of manhood you've been given. How dare you say that you're an activist, which I was saying, and you're a leader, which I was saying, and all you can quote is Richard Wright and Mary Baraka and Malcolm X and a whole bunch of dudes, but you know absolutely nothing about black women and girls, and you were raised by black women. It was my mother and my aunties and my grandmother. My grandfather, I only know my mother's side of the family. That's what I'm saying. My grandfather died when I was 5, 6 years old, so there was no males. There was women, and so where does the music? Where did the music come from? The music was also my mother and my aunt Catherine talking in the kitchen about the challenges of being a black woman in America. You know what I mean? I heard it, but I did not hear it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I was challenged by actually by sisters that were based in Georgia, Boomy. Some of them were students at Spelman College. It's like you need to read Pearl Cleage, you need to read Bell Hooks, you need and I I began to understand. I was afraid. I was terrified. I was like, not me, or why are you coming after me? But I'm like, Kev, man, you've always said you wanted to be a different man than your father. Who wasn't there. You better think about learning something. And so I think that, for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but my journey as an artist was like, I need to put into my art what I'm actually learning. And yeah, I'm going to tell my story as a heterosexual, cisgender, so-called straight black man. But how dare I turn around and oppress someone else for the rest of my life, even with
Mhm.
just my words or my art form? I think about that all the time. I mean, my wife and I were at a pizza parlor in New York City the other day, and they had a certain rapper who's very popular on. I mean, every song was just butchering of black womanhood, butchering of black girls. And we need to be clear that I believe that it has been intentional to take hip hop's soul and to turn it inside out into death and ugliness. And who's one of the easiest targets to do that to? Black women and black girls. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? And then it gets perpetuated across generations. Diddy is 55 years old. The rapper I'm talking about that we were hearing, he's in his 20s. You have multiple generations now of black males who ain't making those songs like Smokey Robinson or Luther Vandross, who are making songs that just are about sex and sexual conquest and doing all kinds of vile stuff. And if you're not being educated the way I was miseducated, I didn't grow up learning, just like I didn't learn Black history. I commend all y'all. My wife came from a family where she learned Black history. Like when I met her, I was like, she's not just Black, she's blackity black. She's real Black. She had parents who were educated about Black culture, Black
Wow.
history. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And that tradition is a blessing. Man, where I came from, we was worshiping everything white, everything white. You know what I mean? My mama did the best that she could. Well, we knew we were black. We sat there and watched the Jeffersons and Good Times and Roots together, but that's about as far as it got. I didn't realize that this is a whole tradition that we come out of, and there's a whole movements that happen, including our musical movements. And so I think we have to be considerate of the fact that a lot of these folks who are saying this destructive stuff don't know any better. They're just repeating what they hear and see. And that's the job now for me. Like let me get into these spaces and really, really work with these males of all generations, but especially the younger ones who are more open to learning. Like, man, you cannot relate to women and girls like this. This is just unacceptable. Unacceptable. Because we didn't become as toxic as the people that we say are oppressing us.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do you think that today's artists they are continuing, or are they continuing, or are they shifting the emotional narratives around black manhood? Do you think they're
I think Kendrick Lamar is one of the few. I think there's a reason. Kendrick is an outlier. I mean, you know, forget the latest stuff. Go back. I wrote a piece about his album. Mr. It's the short title is Mr. Morale. I wrote about it on Complex Magazine's website. People can go check it out. This came out about 2 or 3 years ago, and I was really struck by his vulnerability, by his honesty. He was honest about his relationship with his partner, his life partner, and what she meant to him and what he had done to her. He was honest about his family traumas. I was like, wow, you know what I mean? He talked about homophobia and transphobia. I mean, I was like, this brother's different. You know what I mean? This is different. But he was, and I think it's important that he exists, but we need more of him because it's like he shouldn't be the only one. But Kendrick has actually been doing the work, and that's the key thing. We need men who are actually willing to do the work. That's why we created the film, because the film is really a call for black males and all males. Like, are we willing to do the work? I mean, let's be honest about it. What's happening out of Washington, D.C., who's running the
Mhm.
government, that's toxic manhood. Most of the stuff all the wars that are happening around the world, that's toxic manhood. What's happening in Los Angeles as we're taping this show right now, with this assault on democracy, that's all toxic manhood. It's all toxic manhood. Mass shooting. Most of the mass shooters in this country,
Yes.
95% have men and boys. You know what I mean? It's saying to me there's an epidemic crisis with how we define manhood in this society. It's rooted in violence, it's rooted in ego, it's rooted in senseless competition. I think about you and I are both sports fans. I think, look at the fact that people are making fun of Carl Anthony Towns' body,
Yes.
saying they're using all kinds of, crazy terminology to describe him, to the point where Kyrie Irving stepped in and said, "Hey man, leave him alone. What are y'all doing?" You know what I mean? Because we're constantly, you know, that's what I went through. It's called male policing. It's called male policing. It's called male policing. You can only be a man if you look like this. You can only be a man if you talk like this. You can only be a man if you behave a certain kind of way. And if our music, think about it like this, sister. It's like, if you look at our whole history of music, spirituals, blues, jazz, rock and roll, soul, all of it to the up, I would say up until Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, 1998, a quarter of a century ago, and maybe a few exceptions into the 2000s, but there was always a diversity of voices. There's
Yes.
always a diversity of, the Spinners were not the Temptations. The Temptations were not the Four Tops. Stevie and Sly were not the same people. You know what I mean? But I think what has happened, we can keep going. I'm good. What has happened with hip hop was split into two things. Here's hip hop culture, which is what I represent, which is about life and possibilities and making something out of nothing. And here's the hip hop industry, which is about death and destruction and putting us all in these ridiculous boxes. Here's what a woman is, here's what a man is, and watch us just destroy ourselves. That's what has happened. You know what I mean? And it's tragic because it has now affected, if we go back, if we do hip hop at 50 something now at this point, you know, 1973 to 1998, that's 25 years, up until Lauryn Hill's Miseducation of Lauryn Hill, which is an incredibly diverse, eclectic album. We know
Hmm.
that. Since then, think about the dominant images that we've gotten of black people, of black men, of black women. We are NIGGAs, we're BITCHs. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of drug taking, a lot of liquor, a lot of partying, a lot of violence, a lot of violence, a lot of violence. This is being spread through the music, just like the minstrel show was created in the 1800s by racist white folks to depict black people as, violent, dangerous,
Yes.
no morals. You know what I'm saying? It's the same thing. Yep, it's to a beat now, to a hip hop beat. And we who understand the history understand that we're able to connect the dots. Most people don't even realize how they're being programmed. I've traveled to all 50 states in this country. I always turn the radio on wherever I go. Every city I go to, they're playing. It could be a small rural town in Georgia. It could be Atlanta or Savannah. They're playing the same 12, 13, 14, 15 songs over and over
Yes.
again.
Yes.
And so, how does that affect your definition as a black man, whether you're 20? I know dudes who are 40 and 50. Think about Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce is 50, NBA champion, right?
Hmm.
He about he just want to have a good time at 50.
Yeah.
And you a father in your life, right?
Yes.
Wasn't he a
Yes.
good and grown man? Wasn't he a good
Yes.
and grown man?
Yes.
Am I right? I've
Yes.
heard you talk about your daddy. I'm like, how do we go from men like your father to people who are now 40 and 50 who don't want to grow up?
Right.
Because there's also been a juvenilization of our black music. There's been a
Mm.
juvenilization of our black music where it's encouraged just be irresponsible for the rest of your life. I don't want to comment a lot about this whole Diddy trial. People have been trying to get me in documentaries, and I've said no
Yes.
to everything. But what I will say, as I've been reading the transcript, my wife and I have been let's read the transcripts for ourselves, not just what we see on social media. I'm like, the tragedy of this is that all of this just happened, and people enabled it for decades,
Yes.
and he's not the only one. You know what I mean? And so I just think that, yeah, people influence art, including music, but also think that art can influence people if we're not careful.
Mm. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I've got to ask you about, this is my last question, is kind of a combination question because I was thinking about Tupac Shakur. I know you're
Hmm.
working on a biography about his life. I was thinking about him and how Tupac was such an example of being. I guess I'll use the term hard, and so I'll use
Hmm.
that term, but at the same time being very. I thought well, also very tender, very vulnerable because if you think about the song to his mom and Brenda got a baby, showing that tender side of him. Then I was thinking about the movie Sinners. Sammy possessed that that um I call it tenderness. That's all I can really I can find for it. He
Yeah.
possessed the character Sammy possessed that tenderness that
Yes.
moved that it moved, you know, just that scene in the movie where all of the influences are there in that space and
That
that
was
and that
incredible.
I mean that
Woo!
I, I don't know a person that scene didn't make them cry
Yeah.
to see that,
It
but to see that vulnerability there. To
yes.
talk about that as we close it, as it relates to Tupac Shakur, and artists like a Sammy.
Yes. Well, I mean, Tupac was a Gemini. His birthday is June 16th, and you know, there was many facets to Tupac. I think again, he was raised by an incredible, powerful black woman. There's no Tupac Shakur without a Afeni Shakur, his mother,
Yes.
Black Panther Party member, and someone who really, really pushed him to take education seriously. He and his sister Setua to take education seriously, who instilled in them an awareness of black culture, black history, which is so important. I think that it's funny because as you were talking about Dear Mama, I had a flashback to being in the office at Vibe magazine. By this point, Pac was already in jail. I had already done the prison interview with the so-called famous prison interview with Pac at Rikers Island, and we were able to hear Dear Mama first at Vibe, and so we got into the
Wow.
conference room and they put it on, and I started crying. You know what I mean? Because I was like, it was the most tender. I think it to this day, in all the years, the decades that we've had hip hop, I think it's one of the most tender. I think it's the most tender expression by a black male, a rapper that we've heard in the history of hip hop. Even when you were a crack fiend, mama, you were still a black queen, mama. I mean, he that's empathy, that's compassion for his
Yes.
mother. I mean, people need to understand that Tupac was only 25 when he was killed. I was in Vegas the day he died, by the way. You know what I mean? This is all going to be in the book,
Okay.
and I've taken a long time to do it because I was there in Vegas. I didn't go back to Vegas for about almost 20 years after that he was killed, after he died. I couldn't go back. I couldn't go back. Because it was I was in shock. It was such a traumatic moment. Then again, and then Biggie dies 6 months later. He gets killed 6 months later. It
Yes.
was actually I wasn't at Vibe any longer, but it was actually at a Vibe party. My friend Carla Radford, who was the event producer for Vibe, called me at 2 in the morning, New York time. I was like, why did she call me at 2 in the morning? And she was crying. Biggie's dead. I couldn't believe it. Pac was vulnerable. Pac was able to articulate in a lot of ways like Babyface and Smokey. Because think about Smokey wrote songs. Most of the hits that Mary Wells was my mother's favorite black woman solo artist. I didn't realize Smokey Robinson wrote all those songs for this black woman.
Yes.
Babyface wrote so many songs for black women. Tony Braxton, Whitney Houston, so many. Pac had that ability. When you hear "Keep Your Head Up," you hear "Dear Mama." You know. You hear that vulnerability. You have to be in touch. If you really are trying to redefine who you are as a man, you have to be in touch with your feminine side. You have to be in touch with that other part of you. And I think when I think about Pac, I mean, look how I'm dressed right now. This is hip hop. We know what it is.
Yes. Yes.
A lot of hip hop for black males is very performative. You know what I mean? How we dress, how we walk, how we talk, and so it's a shield, it's a protection. I'm honest about it. You know what I mean? It's like it's and Pac was very much that. And so it's just like you think about the videos that exist of Pac on social media. You see him in high school at that famous high school in Baltimore, the Performing Arts High School, where he is really just free and almost effeminate in his mannerisms. And then within
Yes.
a couple of years, he's thugged out. You know what I mean? It's thug life. And part of that is survival or thinking that's the only way we can survive is to be hard. Part of it is our own confusion. Part of us is not
Mm,
being fully formed as men, you know, and trying to figure out where we fit in. And I think that Pac had all these different sides of him, and he never got to really turn the corner. You know what I mean? And it's sad and tragic. And I think, and unfortunately, I feel like we've been kind of frozen in a lot of ways as black males who have embraced hip hop. I mean, literally, when you think about hip hop now, you can't just say the hip hop generation, or you can't just say hip hop
yes.
nation. It's literally multiple generations. I mean, people like, Kool Herc, one of the founding members, founding fathers of hip hop. He's 70. You have people like myself who are in their 50s or going into their early 60s now. You
Yes.
have people who are in their 30s and 40s. You got teenagers and 20 somethings. And then, we have a niece who's 3 years old, Stony in California. Man, let me tell you, Not Like Us was her jam from Kendrick last year. You know what I'm saying? It was like a nursery rhyme for her, and so you literally have about 4 or 5 generations of folks, like, li since our parents, my mama would say things to me like, "Boy, you still listen to that rap music?" 'Cause she
Yeah.
don't know. I'm like, "Mama, I am hip hop. I am hip hop. I am this is who we are." But we didn't
Yes.
know that we would have people listen, I was sagging my pants along with Tupac in the '90s. There's no way I'm sagging my pants in my 50s. That's
Yes.
insane. I
Yes.
have people in my life who are in their 40s and 50s who are sagging their pants. I'm like, "Yo." And so to your point about Pac, I think that in black males in general with our music is that we have to make a decision that we wanna grow up, and it needs to be reflected in our music. Remember how when I think about how people are so pissed at Andre 3000, why won't he just rap again?
Right,
Because
right.
he wants to play the flute.
Yes.
Now, I don't agree with Andre 3000 when he says he has nothing to rap about. I think Andre's been all over this world. He's been all over the world, him and his flute. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Yes.
All over this country. I'm like, how dope would it be for us to hear his perspective now? You know, Andre's one of our greatest rappers, one of our greatest thinkers. I always knew he was different, but I'm like, but we need people like Andre to actually speak, not just show up with the piano on his back at the Met Gala. Yeah, that was dope. I was like, oh, he got the piano on his back. Now he got a piano album. Okay. But I'm like, what are you seeing now? Because we actually need the older versions of ourselves to help raise the younger versions that think this is other thing everything we're talking about, that this is okay. This is okay for you being a man. You know, I read the Rolling Stone cover story on Lil Wayne. Lil Wayne's about 45 now. You know, we gonna be high forever.
Mm.
We're just gonna, that's it. Just be high forever. And I believe that we need to be sober, especially in
Yes.
these times. I no
Yes.
judge. I've smoked and drank in my lifetime plenty. That's why I'm a vegan now, because I did all of that. And I was like, man, I had enough drunken nights, including several in Georgia, your home state of Georgia, in ATL. I was a fool, but I was also in my 20s and 30s. I'm like, Kev, you're not
Wow.
in your 20s and 30s no more. So you have a different responsibility as a human being, as a
Yes.
man, as a black man, as an artist. You don't just need to, like, you asking what the thing that Pac couldn't come to grips with is not enough to just reflect what's going on in our music, in any art form, but also how do we correct it?
Mm.
I mean, like when you think about Toni Morrison and her great novels, she's not necessarily preaching and beating us over the heads, but you can't tell me anyone who's ever read a single Toni Morrison anything, you didn't come away with some life lessons.
Yes.
Pac gave us mixed signals because he didn't know he was struggling with. I mean, think about what he had to go through. And I think about that, and like be conscious of what I'm working on my next album. It's 21 tracks. It's definitely inspired by Lauryn Hill's Miseducation for Lauryn Hill and Stevie's songs in Key of Life. Lauryn Hill's album had 18 tracks. Stevie's, I believe, had like 22,
Mhm.
23, something like that. And I've just been writing. I've been paying attention to what's going on, in this country, overseas. What do people need? What do we need to hear right now? I'm like, I got a responsibility when I put this next piece of work out, both poetry book and the album version with music, original music, to not just be like everyone else.
Yes. Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Could you
Wow.
imagine? I mean, oh God, and I'm really proud of him. And you'll be happy to know as a Southerner, the two producers are from Mississippi. They
Okay.
live in California, and so to your point about Sinners, that is one of the most incredible films, Boomy, I've ever seen in my life.
Mhm.
And it's because of the musicality throughout the film. It's the music. It's the music. The fact that the film ends with, we get to see Buddy Guy. Buddy Guy gets to get
Yes.
introduced to people. You and I know who Buddy Guy was. Lavo had
Yes.
no idea. And like you said, that magical scene in the middle of the movie where you just see all these reference points that came out of from the blues. I mean, it's just, I mean, Ryan Coogler is a musician.
Mhm.
I mean, the musicality. This it's just but he was, to me, what he did with the film is like, we're going to rescue the music. We're going to take the music back. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's kind of like, people can love or hate Beyonce all they want. I've seen her live. When I went to see her live on the Renaissance tour, and we're going to go see the Cowboy Carter tour, I was mesmerized for 3 hours because I was like, you know what? Y'all can say what y'all want, but I know for a fact, because I pay attention, there was a point when Prince was mentoring her and he was challenging her about her
Mm.
art platform what she wanted to represent. And I'm like, this sister just did an album where she not only reclaimed country music for Black people, she made sure that people who were country music pioneers, specifically Black women, country music artists, were on
Yes.
the album.
Yes.
What does music mean to me? Man, reclaiming who we are, reclaiming the best of who we are. And I don't want to listen to any music that is constantly denigrating me just the way the society does.
Mm.
That's not acceptable. That's when you know you've made peace with self-hatred. If you could just call yourself all kinds of names. You and I have been talking for almost an hour. I don't know how long we've been talking, but it's like I'm not cursing. I curse. I've been cursing since I
Mhm.
was 4 or 5 years. My mama cursed. She go to church regularly and she curses. That's called balance. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Just like I have an uncle who had a Bible in one hand and a Heineken in the other. That's called balance. I ain't no judgment. You know what I'm saying? That's the beauty of our Blackness right there, ain't it?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Heineken in the Bible. Well, right here, brother, in the Bible, you know what I'm saying? We are a funny
Yeah, we
people.
know it all too. Yes. Yes.
Let
Yes.
me tell you. Let me let me tell you. But the music should ultimately be about our liberation.
Yes.
That's what the music should be. When you said Aretha, I mean, listen, I've put Aretha on at different points in my life. You know, I took my mama and my aunt Catherine, my last living aunt, a few years back when the Amazing Grace movie came out, the documentary version of the
Yes.
album. Man, my mother and my aunt talked through the whole movie because they knew everything that was going to be said because they had listened to the album so much through the years. And I was like,
Wow.
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 And then I'm saying to myself, okay, my mother's now 82, my mother's about to be 83, my aunt's about to turn 80. And these are two Black women who migrated from the South up to the North. They've had to deal with racism and sexism and classism their entire lives.
Wow.
And the one thing that has kept them going has been gospel music, has been spirituals, like and things like Amazing Grace by Aretha Franklin.
Wow.
That's their freedom. That's their
Wow.
freedom. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, of course, I'm always,
Thank
from
you
your
for
books
having
to articles,
Thank you
interviews.
for having me.
I catch you on Karen Hunter's show. When you're on there, and just um, it's my
I love
honor
talking
to have
to
had you
you.
on my show.
That's my honor. You're one of our great writers, great poets. I appreciate you. You know, every chance that I get to publish you, I'm gonna reach out to you because I'm like, you're a great poet. And I've been glad to do it. You know what I'm saying? And we just gotta keep supporting each other. I mean, these are
Yes.
difficult times, and that's where the music is too. Like I think that the music has to, when you think about the civil rights movement, we had Nina Simone, we had Aretha, we
Yes.
had Curtis Mayfield, we had Tim Cook, we had all this kind of music that was coming out that was speaking to what was happening, and we need this now. I mean, if we're still making music that is just saying nothing at all,
Yes.
that we got to really rethink who we are as a people at this point. You know what I'm saying? That's really it. We gotta do something. But that's why poets like us, the poets are gonna do. We gonna be consistent because we ain't
Yes.
we ain't.
Yes, and it's ironic that you brought up the civil rights movement. I'll be talking to Ruther Harris, who's one of the founding members of
Mm,
the Freedom Singers. The Freedom Singers were
yes,
born in Albany, Georgia. They're born
that's
here too,
right.
and
That's
so I'm going to be
amazing.
talking to her next week. I think a couple weeks from now. So
Please tell her she may not know me at all, but tell her that you have a friend named Kevin Powell from New York who really did study the civil rights movement because it was my duty to do so. And I say thank you. That I said
yes,
thank you for who she is. And that's what we need. That's what we need. We need freedom songs now.
yes,
You know, um, I can't give away the new album yet. We hope to have it out, and we're working on it. We're going to be going to the studio starting this summer. We're working on it, but I'm really proud of. I'm gonna just say this: we trying to create some anthems, straight up,
wow,
you know. And I pay homage to my late sister Nikki Giovanni and Sonia Sanchez and Mary Baraka and Maya Angelou and Tazaki Shange. Ain't no me, ain't no us without them. And
yes,
I when I was recording the first album, I went back and listened to everything, Nicki's early albums and The Last Poets and The Watts Prophets, because I was like, I also went back and listened to Langston. I was like, let me see how Langston sounded doing his poetry again.
yes,
And man, Langston just read his poetry. Sometimes he would do it with some jazz music. And so, but we were like, okay, how do we merge it with the energy and spirit of where we are with hip hop and everything that's happened, and we got all this technology now, and we got the first album done. We were shocked to get nominated for a Grammy. We're like, word, we got a Grammy nomination out of this? Okay. And I don't do this for awards, but at the
Yes.
same time, I was like, okay, this is important because it at least puts poetry in a space where, people need to know. But I've always been like, y'all still got to read the poetry. Don't just listen to the poetry, read it. Like, I need to say this to you, I've really enjoyed reading the poetry of people like yourself for the last few years because, Sonia Sanchez taught me this. It's like, we should not lose the fact that poetry itself is music. There's a musicality, like we said at the
Mm,
beginning,
yes.
how we speak, how we talk, and how we enunciate things. But she also stressed to us that the poetry has to stand up on the page. It needs to stand up on the page. When there's no music, when you're not spitting it from a microphone or an open mic, is this poem, in terms of its craft, a good poem? And that always
Yes.
stuck with me. Like, wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think about
Wow.
that. I think about that a lot. As we do this, and I think about the music, and I've been listening to a lot of music. That's why I was so happy to do your show, because I've been listening to everything. And the only thing I can say about the new album is going to feel like a survey through the history of Black music, because we covered a
Wow.
lot of genres. Yeah, 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 a lot of genres. It's that, I mean, I was like, can we get a washboard on this joint? Can we get a banjo over here? You know what I'm saying? We've been playing with
Wow.
sounds. I can't wait for you to hear it. We've
Well,
been
I'm
playing
looking
with all
forward
kinds.
because I have the first one, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking
It
forward
is
to.
different. I'm proud of the first one, I mean, but I will admit, I'm a little artsy kid, so it's very artsy, the first one. So I wanted something. I said, you know what? I want people to be able to dance to this and be like, I want people to do a line dance to my songs too. At least one of them.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Yeah.
I want one of my songs at the cookout and the family reunion, straight up. You know what I mean? And at the repast after the funeral, straight
Right.
up.
Right.
You know
Right.
what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yes. Yes. Wow.
I
But
appreciate you for having me.
thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for, I mean,
Uh,
your contributions to our culture. You know, it's
well, I
just,
thank you.
I know
I
you
just,
don't see, I'm not, you probably, you may not see yourself as that, but yeah, you are definitely a contributor to our culture in the last 30 years, 30, 35 years. You really,
wow.
um,
Well, all praise is due to God and the ancestors. And I just, we just lost my sister Ananda Lewis the other day. We lost
yes.
Sasha Jenkins, great hip hop cultural worker, a week or 2 weeks ago. And I just, you feel your mortality more than ever. And I just, for me now, I hope to live a long life. I want to live to 100. Shoot, I ain't gonna
Yeah.
even lie. I'm trying to be here, and
Yes.
outlast all the foolishness that's happening. But, whatever time we have, create something that hopefully will touch some people, whatever it is that you do, that's how I
Okay.
look at it now, and at the end of the day, I'm the son of a woman who picked cotton at age 8 years old in South Carolina, whose father was a sharecropper, and whose mother, his wife, my grandmother, my late grandmother, she was the help in people's homes, and I was just taught to work, and that's what was instilled in me. My mother packed her suitcases. What she brought with her up north was a belief in God, was a work ethic, and also the music. That's what came with her, and that was given to me.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you, Mr. Powell.
Thank you. We'll be in touch. Blessings to
All
everyone
right.
out there. All right, now. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you for being a part of the intersection. And thank all of you who'll be watching this. Thank you so much for being a part of this great episode of Intersection. God bless.